On our 25th anniversary, she announced she'd spend the night with her dream man, then walked out the door. She called me her rock, her safety net. She forgot that the most dangerous man in the room is the one nobody sees coming. My name is Garrett Callahan. I'm 53 years old. I've spent the last 22 years as a senior project manager in the oil industry, coordinating multi-million-dollar operations across the Gulf Coast. I've managed crisis situations that would make most men fold. I've kept my head when rigs went down and budgets exploded and crews panicked. But nothing, not one single emergency in 22 years, prepared me for the evening of my 25th wedding anniversary. Naomi and I got married in June of 1999. She was 25, I was 28. We had 3 kids who turned out to be the best thing either of us ever did. Kevin, 28 now, a software developer for Apple out in Cupertino, married to Brooke and father to boys, Mason, 5, and Eli, 3. Our daughter, Lee, 26, a medical resident in Atlanta, married to a steady guy named Paul, and mother to little Sophie, who just turned a year and a half. And then there's Brad, 23, our youngest, running a small but growing construction outfit here in Houston. Still single, still finding his way, but working hard at it. 25 years. I'd planned the evening for weeks. Not a restaurant. Naomi had said a few months back she preferred something more intimate, something at home. So I took that to heart. I left work early on a Friday, stopped at the florist, picked up her favorite Bordeaux, and spent the afternoon cooking the rosemary lamb she'd always said was her favorite meal. I set the table with the good china, lit the candles, changed into a pressed shirt and slacks. I even found a playlist from our honeymoon trip to Savannah, old Motown that used to make her sway in the kitchen. Naomi came home at 6:15. She was dressed in something I had never seen before, a dark green wrap dress, heels, and hair done like she was heading to a gallery opening. She smelled different. The perfume was unfamiliar. "Garrett," she said, and her voice had that careful tone to it, the one I now recognize as rehearsed. "This looks really nice." I kissed her cheek. She turned it slightly so it barely landed. "Happy anniversary," I said. "Lamb's almost ready." She set her bag down on the counter and didn't move toward the table. She stood there, hands folded in front of her, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite name at the time. I can name it now. It was pity. "I need to tell you something before we sit down," she said. I turned down the stove. "Okay. I won't be staying tonight." She said it quietly, like she was explaining she'd be skipping a work meeting. "Dylan, from the gallery. He leaves for Barcelona on Sunday. He invited me to spend the evening with him." The room didn't spin. I didn't go weak. I just stood very still, holding a dish towel, staring at the woman I had built my entire adult life around. "On our anniversary," I said. It wasn't a question. "The timing isn't ideal, I know. But it's just one night, Garrett." Her chin lifted slightly. "He's my dream. He understands things about me that I've needed for a long time. I'll be back tomorrow morning, and we can celebrate then. You and I, we're solid. That's exactly why I can tell you this." I looked at her for a long moment. 25 years of marriage, 25 years of loyalty, every project, every deployment, every missed birthday because of a rig crisis, all of it stacked up in my chest like something about to give way. "You're telling me," I said slowly, "that you're leaving our anniversary dinner to spend the night with another man, and your reason I should accept this is because we're solid. You've always been my rock, Garrett. Your safety net," I said. She didn't deny it. She picked up her bag, tucked a small note under the fruit bowl, Dylan's address, I found out later, kissed my cheek for the second time that evening, and walked out the door. The lamb finished cooking. The candles burned. The Motown playlist moved song to song in an empty kitchen. I stood there alone and made a decision so quiet it barely made sound. What I did next shocked everyone who thought they knew me. I didn't call anyone right away. That's not who I am. I've spent over 2 decades managing situations where panic is the enemy, where the first man to lose his head becomes the biggest problem in the room. So I did what I always do when something goes sideways. I got quiet and I got methodical. I turned off the stove, covered the lamp, blew out the candles one by one. Then I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, sat down at the kitchen table, and let the facts land. Naomi had walked out on our 25th anniversary to spend the night with a man named Dylan, someone from the art gallery where she'd been working part-time for the past 2 years. She had dressed for him, perfumed herself for him, and she had told me about it with the calm confidence of a woman who had absolutely no doubt I would still be sitting in that chair when she came back. The bourbon burned slow. I didn't rush it. After about 20 minutes, my phone rang. My brother, Ray, calling to wish us a happy anniversary, same as he did every year. I picked up. "Happy 25, Garrett," he said. "Did she like the lamb?" "She didn't stay," I said. A beat of silence. "What do you mean she didn't stay?" I told him, straight, no dramatizing. Ray's not a man who needs things dressed up, and neither am I. By the time I finished, he was quiet in a way that told me he was choosing his words carefully. "Garrett," he finally said, "that woman has lost her mind." "Maybe," I said, "but I haven't lost mine. That's what matters right now." After we hung up, I did something I'm not entirely proud of, but I don't regret it either. 3 years ago, when Naomi got a new phone, I set up the automatic cloud backup as part of our shared family storage account. It was a practical thing: tax documents, family photos, shared calendars. She never paid much attention to how it worked. I opened my laptop and logged in. The photos loaded in reverse chronological order. The most recent ones were from that afternoon, Naomi getting ready, mirror selfies in the dress she'd worn out the door. I kept scrolling, and there he was, Dylan, silver-haired, mid-50s, the kind of man who looks like he's always posing for something. The first photo of the two of them together was dated 4 months ago, a gallery event. Then another, closer each time. The body language by month 3 told a story that required no caption. I sat with that for a while. Then I opened our shared email account, the one we used for household bills and the kids' school records going back years. In the deleted folder, I found a thread. Naomi had been careful, short messages, nothing explicit, but the intent was unmistakable. They'd been planning this evening for at least 6 weeks. The Barcelona trip was real. The timeline was real. And the assumption that I would accept her return without consequence was built right into the language she used. "I'll handle Garrett. He always comes around." I read that line twice. Then I closed the laptop. I went upstairs, changed out of my press shirt, and pulled on jeans and a work jacket. Then I drove across town to the office of Thomas Whitfield, my attorney and one of the few men I genuinely trust. I called ahead. He was still there. Thomas met me at the door with a look that said he already knew this wasn't a social call. He's known me for 18 years. He poured coffee without asking, sat across from his desk, and listened without interrupting while I laid out everything: the announcement, the photos, the emails, the 6-week premeditation. When I finished, he set down his mug. "She planned it for your anniversary specifically. The Barcelona timing gave her a deadline," I said. "The anniversary was just convenient." Thomas shook his head slowly. "Garrett, I need to ask you directly. What are you looking to do here?" "Protect myself," I said. "Not revenge, not drama. I want to know exactly where I stand before she walks back through that door tomorrow morning." He nodded. "Then the first call in the morning is to Patricia. We need a full picture of the finances before anything else moves." I drove home at midnight. The house was dark. The lamp was still on the stove. The anniversary candles had burned down to nothing in their holders. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't pace either. I sat at my desk and wrote 3 pages of notes in a legal pad I keep for work: names, dates, amounts, observations, the same kind of documentation I'd used to manage a failing project, because that's what this was now, a situation that required management, clear thinking, no wasted emotion. At some point before dawn, one thought settled in and stayed. Naomi had built her confidence on 25 years of me being predictable. She'd read my steadiness as permission. She'd mistaken my loyalty for a door that would always swing open, no matter what walked through it. She was about to find out that door had a lock. Patricia arrived at Thomas's office at 8:30 sharp. She's been my financial advisor for 14 years, a compact, no-nonsense woman who speaks in numbers the way other people speak in sentences. She set her laptop on Thomas's conference table, opened a folder, and got straight to it. "Your separate investment portfolio is performing well above market average," she said. "The accounts your mother left you, the ones Naomi never showed much interest in managing, they've grown considerably. That money is yours alone, Garrett, premarital inheritance, held in your name only, never commingled. In a divorce proceeding, those funds are protected." Thomas nodded from across the table. "The house is joint property, but Garrett has made roughly 72% of the mortgage payments from his personal accounts. That matters in asset division." I listened to both of them lay out the picture. It was steadier than I expected. 22 years of disciplined financial management had built something Naomi apparently hadn't fully mapped. "There's one more thing," Patricia said, and her tone shifted slightly. She turned the laptop to face me. "I ran a routine audit of the joint household accounts this morning. Over the past 26 months, there have been consistent transfers between $800 and $1,400 monthly to an account I don't recognize. Not a utility, not a subscription, an external account in Naomi's name alone." I leaned forward. "How much total?" "Approximately $31,000. Thomas wrote something on his legal pad without looking up. I drove home from that meeting with a clearer head than I'd had in 12 hours. Naomi's car was in the driveway. I went in through the garage, walked past her in the living room without stopping, and went upstairs to change. She followed me to the bedroom doorway. "We need to talk, Garrett." "We will," I said, "not today." "You can't just." "I can," I said, and looked at her directly. "And I am." I left the house 30 minutes later and drove to Kevin's. He and Brooke lived 20 minutes from us, a house they bought 2 years ago when Mason started school. Kevin met me at the door with a look that said his mother had already called him. We sat at his kitchen table. Brooke took the boys to the backyard. "She called you," I said. "This morning," Kevin confirmed. "He's 28, but carries himself older, always has. He runs mobile architecture for Apple's enterprise division and has a mind that cuts through noise fast. She said you were acting erratically? That you'd gone cold on her without warning." He paused. I didn't believe her version. "Smart," I said. I told him everything. Kevin listened, and as I talked, something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, but recognition, as if pieces he'd been holding separately were suddenly arranging themselves. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, can I show you something?" He pulled out his laptop. "I've been doing some digging since Mom called. I'm not proud of how I did it, but I used some tools I have access to through work, metadata recovery, account activity log for shared family services." He turned the screen toward me. "Mom consulted a divorce attorney. The appointment was 6 weeks before your anniversary." I stared at the screen. A calendar entry pulled from a deleted sync on the shared family account. The name of a family law firm downtown, a 2-hour block on a Tuesday afternoon. "She was planning to file first," Kevin said quietly, "before you knew anything." The silence in that kitchen was heavy enough to touch. "The anniversary wasn't just a convenient night for Dylan's Barcelona trip," I said, half to myself. "She needed a reason, something that would make her look like the one who'd been pushed away." Kevin nodded slowly. "If she filed citing emotional distance or incompatibility, and you were still waiting at home with candles lit, that's a very different case than if you move first." I sat with that for a long, long moment. Then I stood, put my hand on my son's shoulder, and said, "You did right. Don't second-guess it." He looked up at me. "What are you going to do?" "Exactly what needs to be done," I said, "and not one thing more." That afternoon, my daughter Lee called from Atlanta. She'd heard from Brad, who'd heard from Naomi. Lee didn't lead with drama. She's a physician. She leads with assessment. Dad, she said, I've been watching Mom's patterns for about 2 years. The way she talks about that gallery, the way she references that man. I didn't want to say anything because I wasn't certain. But what she showed you last night, that's not an impulse. That's a personality pattern. She has never once, in my memory, considered how her actions land on the people closest to her until after the fact. Your brother thinks she was planning to file before I could, I said. A pause. Then, that doesn't surprise me, Dad. Not at all. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat in my truck in Kevin's driveway for a few minutes, watching the oak trees move in the afternoon wind. 25 years, and the woman I built it all with had been running a parallel plan while I cooked lamb and set out the good china. I started the truck and pulled out the driveway. I had 3 more calls to make before the day was done. Brad called me that evening. I was back at the house in my home office when my phone lit up with his name. Dad, his voice was tight, the way it gets when he's angry but trying to hold it. Mom called me. She said you'd gone completely off the rails, that you came home, didn't say a word to her, and left again. She's really upset. I know she is, I said. So what's going on? Talk to me. I told him. I kept it factual, the same version I'd given Kevin without the edge. Brad is 23. He's still in the part of his life where he processes things emotionally first and logically second, and I knew pushing hard wouldn't land. When I finished, he was quiet. Then, yeah, that was wrong of her. But you two have 25 years, Dad. People make mistakes. Are you really going to blow up the whole family over one night? Brad, I said, this wasn't one night. It was 6 months in the making. She had an appointment with a divorce attorney 6 weeks ago. She's been moving money to a private account for over 2 years. Another silence, longer this time. I didn't know that, he said, and some of the edge left his voice. I know you didn't. That's why I'm telling you. I kept my tone even. I'm not asking you to take sides. I'm asking you to deal with facts, not the version of events you're being handed. He didn't say much after that. We ended the call without resolution, but without a fight either. The following morning, I packed a bag. I'd spoken with Thomas the evening before, and his advice was straightforward. Establish physical separation before any legal proceedings began. It was cleaner. It was clearer. It protected my position. I chose a furnished apartment in a high-rise downtown. Month-to-month lease, secure building, 15th floor with a view of the ship channel I'd always found grounding. I signed a lease that afternoon and made 2 trips with my car, clothes, personal documents, the framed photo of Kevin and Brad at a Texans game from 2017, and one of Lee at her medical school graduation. I left Naomi a letter on the kitchen counter. I kept it short. Naomi, I've moved out temporarily while we determine what comes next. The household accounts remain active. All bills will continue to be paid. I've retained Thomas Whitfield. You should do the same. Garrett. I placed it next to the small anniversary gift I'd bought her 3 weeks earlier, a silver bracelet engraved with the date of our wedding. Still boxed, still wrapped. I didn't look back at the table when I left. Naomi's response came in text messages over the following 4 hours, 9 of them, escalating from confusion to anger to something that read almost like panic. Where are you? Garrett, this is completely unnecessary. You're overreacting. I made one mistake. The kids are going to think you've lost it. I need you to come home so we can talk like adults. I read each one. I didn't respond to any of them. What I did instead was call Patricia and authorize her to restrict Naomi's access to the personal investment accounts, not the joint household accounts, which stayed fully funded, but the separate portfolio that was mine by law and always had been. Naomi found out within 24 hours. Her 9th text message became a 10th. You had no right to touch those accounts. I showed it to Thomas the next morning. He read it, set the phone down, and said, "She's rattled." Good. Rattled people make mistakes. Then came the message I hadn't expected. It arrived not from Naomi, but from Dylan. A text to my number, which Naomi had apparently shared with him. That read, Mr. Callahan, I think we should speak. I was told your arrangement was open. I had no intention of causing harm. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it directly to Thomas with one line, add this to the file. I didn't respond to Dylan. That evening, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, 15 floors above the city. The air smelled like the refineries to the south, the same industrial smell that had been part of my professional life for over 2 decades. Familiar. Grounding. My phone buzzed with a call I'd been expecting. It was Thomas. Dylan texted you, he said. Naomi told him it was an open marriage. I know, I said. I forwarded you the message. Good. And Garrett, he paused. She didn't just plan this. She built a cover story for her partner, too. This goes considerably deeper than one bad night. I looked out at the city lights reflecting on the water below. I know exactly how deep it goes, I said. That's why I moved first. Dylan's text sat in my forwarded emails like a small, quiet bomb. Thomas had added it to the file without comment. But when I sat across from him 2 days after moving into the apartment, he brought it up with the kind of measured tone that means something matters more than the words suggest. He reached out to you directly, Thomas said. That tells me he's worried. Men who feel clean about a situation don't reach out to the husband. He said he was told it was an open arrangement, I said. Which means Naomi told him you'd both agreed to something you never agreed to. Thomas tapped his pen against the legal pad. That's not just infidelity, Garrett. That's a fabricated narrative she sold to her partner. It changes the moral architecture of what she did considerably. I hadn't responded to Dylan's text. I had no intention of doing so. But 2 days later, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered, the voice on the other end introduced himself. This is Dylan Marsh. I apologize for the intrusion. I felt I owed you a direct conversation. I stepped out onto my apartment balcony and let him talk. He had come back from Barcelona 4 days early. He hadn't planned to call me, but something Naomi had said during a phone call that week had unsettled him enough that he'd started asking questions he should have asked months earlier. She had told him, he said, that our marriage had been a formality for years, that we lived essentially separate lives, that I had known about his existence, and had quietly accepted it. I let him finish. Then I said, not one word of that is true. Naomi announced her plans to me on our anniversary evening. It was the first I knew of any of it. We had no arrangement of any kind. Silence on the line, long enough that I could hear traffic somewhere on his end. She told me you were a safety net, he said finally, that you'd always been fine with things as long as the household kept running. She told you what she needed you to believe so you'd go along with it. I said, whatever you two decide from here is your business, but I want you to know exactly what foundation you've been standing on. Dylan hung up without another word. I stood on the balcony for a moment, looking out at the Houston skyline. Then I called Thomas and gave him the full account of the conversation. He said immediately, date, time, exact content of the exchange. Email it to yourself so it's timestamped. This is useful. That same week, Naomi's attorney made contact with Thomas, a firm downtown, one of the more aggressive family law practices in the city. They submitted an initial proposal that suggested a 50-50 split of all marital assets, including the separate investment portfolio I'd inherited from my mother. Thomas called me after reading it. They're including the inheritance accounts, he said, which tells me either her attorney hasn't done their homework, or they're opening high to see how you respond. How do we respond? With documentation, he said. Every deposit, every source, every year it's been held in your name alone. Patricia has all of it. We'll bury the claim in paper before it gets within 10 feet of a courtroom. I authorized Thomas to proceed. Then I called Patricia, who had the full financial history packaged and ready inside 48 hours. The inheritance accounts had been in my name exclusively since my mother's passing 11 years ago, never commingled, never used for joint household expenses. The paper trail was clean. Naomi's attorney went quiet on that front. What Naomi didn't go quiet on was the family channel. She called Brad twice that week, long calls from what Brad told me when he finally came by the apartment on a Thursday evening. He showed up unannounced, stood in my doorway with his hands in his jacket pockets, and said, "Can I come in?" We sat at my kitchen table the same way we used to sit at the one back home when he was a teenager and had something on his mind he didn't know how to start. "Mom told me you're trying to take everything," he said, "that you've cut her off financially and you're going after the gallery money. The household accounts are fully active," I said. "She has access to everything she needs for daily life. What I've done is protect the assets that were mine before this marriage and will be mine after it. That's not taking, that's defending." Brad stared at the table. "She cried on the phone, Dad." "I know she did," I said. "Your mother is very effective when she needs something. That doesn't make her version of events accurate." I pushed my laptop across the table and showed him what Kevin had found, the deleted calendar entry, the law firm, the date. 6 weeks before our anniversary. Brad read it twice. Then he sat back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. "She was going to file first," he said quietly, "and position herself as the wrong party," I said, "before I knew a single thing." Brad was quiet for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the city moved along without caring about any of it. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said finally. "I should have listened harder the first time you told me." "You're 23, I said. "You believed your mother. That's not a character flaw." He stayed for another hour. We watched the last quarter of a Texans game and didn't talk about Naomi at all. When he left, he shook my hand at the door, the way men do when words aren't quite sufficient. It was the first time in weeks something had felt like it was moving back toward right. The lifestyle piece ran on a Thursday morning. I found out about it when Kevin sent me a link with a single message. "You need to see this." It was a local Houston blog, one of those glossy city interest sites that runs pieces about interior design and restaurant openings alongside the occasional human interest story. The headline read, "Rediscovering Yourself After Decades of Giving, One Woman's Journey." Naomi wasn't named directly. The article used a Houston woman in her early 50s throughout, but the details were specific enough. The art gallery, the 25-year marriage, the husband who struggled to accept her personal growth, that anyone in our circle would know exactly who it was about. I read it twice. Then I called Thomas. "She gave an interview," I said. "I saw it 20 minutes ago," he said. "Her attorney is going to have a problem with this. It creates a discoverable public record of her characterization of the marriage. Can be used." "It's already in the file," Thomas said. "Keep reading it to the end." I did. The final paragraph quoted her anonymously as saying that she had finally chosen to honor her own desires after years of quiet compromise, and that she hoped her husband would eventually understand that this was never about him, but about her own becoming. Her own becoming. I set the phone down. The gallery called her the following day, not the director, the managing partner, a man named Harrison Cole who ran the business side and had 2 major collectors on speed dial. Kevin found out through a contact he had in the Nashville art scene. Houston's gallery world is smaller than most people think. Harrison had received calls from 3 clients who had seen the blog piece, made the connection, and were uncomfortable with the association. 2 of them were longtime donors. One was the primary sponsor of the gallery's fall exhibition. By the end of the week, Naomi's hours at the gallery had been quietly reduced. She was still listed as staff, but the invitation to the fall exhibition planning meeting, an event she talked about for months, did not arrive. Dana Harmon called me that same week, Naomi's closest friend, a woman I'd always liked well enough, though I'd suspected for some time that she'd known more than she let on. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. We sat at a corner table at a place near Rice Village. Dana looked tired and uncomfortable in equal measure. "I want to apologize, Garrett," she said before Clear's throat I could say anything. "I knew about Dylan. I knew for about 4 months. She talked to me about him like it was just something that was happening, and I was supposed to be okay with hearing it. She wrapped her hands around her mug. I told her the timing was cruel. She said you'd understand, that you always understood. And you didn't push back harder than that. I said. No. She had the decency not to make excuses for it. I didn't, and I should have. I should have told her directly that what she was doing was going to blow up her family. I chose the easier thing, which was to stay quiet and stay her friend. I looked at her for a moment. I appreciate you saying it. What are you going to do? She asked. Finish what needs to be finished, I said, with as little collateral damage as possible. Dana nodded slowly. For what it's worth, and I know it's not worth much right now, most people who know you two know the truth. Her version isn't landing the way she thought it would. I thanked her and left. On the way back to my apartment, I stopped at Kevin's. Brooke answered the door with Mason clinging to her leg. Mason looked up at me with his grandfather's eyes, Callahan eyes, my mother used to say, and said, "Grandpa, are you coming to live with us?" I crouched down to his level. "Not today, buddy, but I'm close, and I'm not going anywhere." He seemed satisfied with that. He ran back inside yelling something to his brother about a cartoon. Brooke watched him go, then looked at me. "He asks about you every day," she said quietly. I nodded. That one landed somewhere deep. Inside, Kevin and I sat in his kitchen while Brooke kept the boys occupied. He'd been watching the gallery situation develop and had a characteristically precise summary ready. She burned her professional credibility to build a public narrative, he said, and the narrative isn't even working. The people who know you aren't buying it. She underestimated what 25 years of showing up actually builds, I said. Kevin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, is there any version of this where you two work it out?" I looked at my son, this steady, careful young man who'd been paying attention since he was old enough to understand what paying attention meant. "No," I said, "not because of the night itself, because of what the night revealed. You can forgive a mistake. You can't rebuild trust with someone who is engineering your exit while you're cooking dinner." Kevin nodded once. He didn't push. That was answer enough for both of us. I found a legal pad in the third box I unpacked, the one I'd grabbed from the bottom shelf of my home office closet without looking closely at the contents. It wasn't a diary, exactly. I've never been the type, but I used to write in legal pads when I needed to think through something complicated. Project timelines, financial models, occasionally something personal. This one was from 2016, 8 years ago. I sat on the edge of my apartment bed and read through it slowly. Most of it was work, rig schedules, a personnel issue I barely remembered, budget projections for a Gulf Coast expansion. But near the back, in the tighter handwriting I use when I'm tired, I found 2 pages that stopped me cold. September 14th, 2016. Naomi mentioned the gallery again tonight, the 3rd time this week. I told her it sounded like a good opportunity. She didn't seem to hear me. She was already looking at her phone. I've noticed lately that I finished conversations we never actually started. I should probably say something. I won't, because saying something means disrupting a balance, and the balance keeps everything moving. Is that wisdom or avoidance? I'm not sure anymore. I sat with that for a long time. 8 years ago, I had seen something clearly enough to write it down, and then I had filed it away and kept moving. That was the system. That was what I did. Keep the rig running. Keep the household funded. Keep the peace. Naomi had read that system fluently for 25 years. She'd known I would absorb without confronting. She'd built her exit strategy on that knowledge. I closed the legal pad and put it in my desk drawer. Not to forget it. To remember exactly how clearly I'd once seen the truth and chosen comfort over clarity. That Thursday, I had my first appointment with a therapist named Dr. Elaine Marsh. A referral from Lee, who trusted her professionally. I almost canceled twice. Men my age, in my industry, don't typically walk into a therapist's office to talk about feelings. But I went because what I was carrying wasn't feeling anymore. It was data I needed to process correctly. Dr. Marsh was direct and unhurried. She listened to the summary I gave her the same way a good physician listens to symptoms, without filling in the blanks prematurely. When I finished, she said, "You've spent 25 years managing other people's comfort at the expense of naming your own experience. That's not weakness, but it created a dynamic that someone with different values was able to exploit." She knew I wouldn't push back hard enough. I said. "She knew what you valued more than conflict," Dr. Marsh said. "Stability, continuity, the appearance of a functioning partnership." She paused. "The question now is what you value more than those things." I thought about that on the drive back to my apartment. The answer, when it arrived, was simple enough. Myself. That evening, Kevin called to tell me a local lifestyle blog had quietly removed the piece Naomi had given. He didn't know why. Whether it was legal pressure from Thomas's office or internal editorial second-guessing. It was gone either way. "The gallery situation is worse for her, though," Kevin said. Harrison Cole apparently told her directly that the fall exhibition wouldn't include her in any client-facing role. "She burned that bridge for a story that didn't even hold," I said. "Yeah," Kevin said. "People notice when the version someone's selling doesn't match what they've seen for 20 years. After we hung up, I made a cup of coffee, stood at the window, and watched the city for a while. Not thinking about Naomi. Not running numbers. Just standing there in a space that was entirely mine with a future that had not yet been written. For the first time since this began, that felt less like a loss and more like a starting point. The confrontation I hadn't been able to avoid came at Lee's request. She was in Houston for a medical conference, and asked me to dinner. "The three of us," she said. "Her, me, and Naomi. Not to reconcile. To close a loop," she said carefully, that had been left open too long. I agreed. Lee had earned that. We met at a quiet Italian place in Montrose. I arrived first, ordered water, and waited. Naomi came in looking composed in a way that required effort. I could see it in the set of her shoulders. She sat across from me without embracing me. We were past that. Lee arrived 2 minutes later, still in her conference lanyard, and sat between us like a referee who hadn't asked for the assignment. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation stayed surface level. Lee's conference, the kids, Mason's new school year. Then Lee set down her fork and said quietly but firmly, "I asked you both here because I needed to say some things with both of you present." She looked at her mother first. "Mom, I love you, but I've been watching your behavior patterns for 2 years, and what you did to Dad, the planning, the attorney visit, the financial transfers, that wasn't a crisis. That was a choice. Repeated choices over a long time." Her voice didn't waver. "You treated Dad like a structure to live inside, not a person to consider. And I need you to hear me say that directly." Naomi's jaw tightened. "Lee, you don't have the full picture." "I have enough of it," Lee said. "I'm a physician. I read patterns. I know what I've seen." Then she turned to me. "And Dad, I need you to know that whatever comes next, Kevin and Brad and I are standing with you. Not against Mom. With you. Not at once." That was sufficient. Naomi turned to me then, and something in her expression shifted. The composure thinning at the edges. "After everything, Garrett. 25 years. You're just going to end it over one mistake." I looked at her steadily. "You consulted a divorce attorney 6 weeks before our anniversary. You moved $31,000 to a private account over 2 years. You told your partner we had an open arrangement that never existed. I kept my voice level and clear. That's not one mistake. That's a sustained decision to deceive someone who trusted you completely. The only thing I did wrong was trust you longer than the evidence warranted." Naomi's eyes went bright. "You make it sound so cold." "It was cold," I said. "What you built was cold. I'm just describing it accurately." The table was quiet for a moment. Lee looked at her plate. Outside, the restaurant moved around us. Ordinary Tuesday night life. "The divorce filing goes in next week," I said. "Thomas will handle everything through proper channels. You'll be treated fairly, but this marriage is finished." Naomi said nothing for a long, long moment. Then, quietly, I never thought you'd actually leave. I know, I said. That was the miscalculation. I paid the bill. I hugged Lee at the door and told her I was proud of her. For the conference, for the medicine, for the clarity she'd shown tonight. She held on a beat longer than usual. Driving back to my apartment, I felt no anger. No grief. Just the steady, clean clarity of a man who had finally said exactly what needed to be said to exactly the people who needed to hear it. The door was closed. The lock was set. 3 months after moving into the apartment on the 15th floor, I started to recognize what my life actually looked like when I was living it for myself. The mornings were different. I woke without the low-grade tension that I'd carried so long I'd stopped noticing it. The subtle recalibration of mood that comes from sharing a house with someone who has stopped seeing you clearly. Coffee on a balcony. The ship channel visible in the early light. The day ahead belonging entirely to me. Thomas had connected me with a volunteer financial literacy program at a community center in Midtown. A referral through a colleague who ran the board. I started going on Tuesday evenings. The participants were mostly retirees and recently widowed men and women trying to navigate accounts and investments their spouses had always managed. The work was immediate and tangible in a way that 22 years of corporate project management rarely was. I was sitting across a table from a 70-year-old woman named Ruth who just discovered her late husband's pension had a survivor benefit she hadn't known existed, and watching the anxiety leave her face in real time. That mattered. I hadn't realized how much I'd needed something that mattered in that specific way. I met Helen at the 3rd session. She was a retired high school English teacher from Katy, sharp, direct, with a dry humor that surfaced at unexpected moments. We ended up talking for 40 minutes after the session ended. About everything from Houston traffic to what it meant to rebuild a life after 60. She had lost her husband to a long illness 4 years earlier, and she carried it without performing it, which I respected. You seem like a man who's figuring something out, she said on our second Tuesday. Actively, I said. She smiled. That's a better position than most. The divorce proceedings moved with the efficiency Thomas had promised. Naomi's attorney had retreated from the aggressive opening position once Patricia's documentation dismantled the inheritance account claim entirely. The settlement negotiations were businesslike. Not without friction, but without the prolonged warfare some divorces become. The house will be sold. The proceeds split according to a formula Thomas had negotiated that reflected my documented mortgage contributions. The joint accounts were divided cleanly. The $31,000 Naomi had moved to her private account became a point of formal record. Her attorney didn't contest it, which told me they'd advise her against a fight she couldn't win. Brad helped me move my remaining things from the house on a Saturday in early October. We worked steadily and without much conversation, carrying boxes to a storage unit I'd rented, leaving behind what was hers or jointly held. At one point, Brad picked up the framed photo of the two of us at Texans game, the one I'd already taken to the apartment, and looked at it for a moment before setting it back in the box. I'm sorry I didn't listen the first time, he said. You did eventually, I said. That's what counts. He nodded and kept working. That was enough. Kevin called that evening. How did the move go? Clean, I said. Straightforward. Good. A pause. Mason keeps asking when you're coming to watch him play soccer. This weekend, I said. Tell him I'll be there for every game this season. I heard Mason shout something in the background, loud and unintelligible and entirely joyful, and Kevin laughed. That sound, more than anything else that day, felt like solid ground beneath my feet. The volunteer program asked me to expand my involvement. A second session on Thursdays and a mentorship component for young adults navigating their first jobs and financial decisions. I said yes without hesitating. Helen and I had coffee 3 times that month. Nothing more than that. 2 people talking, trading observations about the world, finding that the conversation was easy in a way that had become unfamiliar to me. I wasn't in a hurry. She wasn't either. That suited both of us fine. On the last Tuesday of October, I drove past our old house on the way home from the community center. The real estate sign was up. Morgan's firm, a good agent, a fair price. The lights were off inside. The rose bushes I planted along the front walk were still there, trimmed and holding their shape. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. I drove back to my apartment, made coffee, and stood at the window for a while. The city was steady below me, lit and moving and entirely indifferent to one man's reckoning. But somewhere out there, Mason and Eli were asleep in their beds. Sophie was a year and a half old and learning to run. Brad was building something of his own. Kevin and Lee were showing up for their lives with more clarity than people twice their age. That was the inheritance I'd actually built. Not accounts or property. These three people and the small ones they were raising. I opened the volunteer program's scheduling app and blocked out every Tuesday and Thursday for the next 4 months. Then I poured the coffee, sat down at my desk, and started on what came next. 4 months after the filing, the divorce was finalized on a Wednesday morning in a downtown courthouse. Thomas was there. I wore a jacket and tie. Not for ceremony, but because I've always believed that how you carry yourself through difficult things matters. The judge reviewed the settlement agreement, confirmed both parties' consent, and signed the order in less time than it takes to review a hospital compliance report. 25 years of marriage concluded in 11 minutes of legal procedure. Thomas shook my hand outside the courtroom. "Clean exit," he said, "exactly as planned." "Thanks to you," I said. "You did the hard work," he said. "I just organized paperwork." Naomi had been represented by her attorney only. We hadn't spoken directly since the dinner at Lee's restaurant in Montrose. Her professional situation at the gallery had continued to deteriorate. Harrison Cole had restructured staff roles in a way that effectively ended her client-facing position. Dylan, from what Thomas had gathered through channels, had ended whatever arrangement they'd maintained after his Barcelona trip. He had returned to find a situation considerably messier than the one Naomi had described to him. The gallery partnership inquiry had also produced results. A formal audit of the gallery's finances, prompted by a separate investor complaint unrelated to our divorce, had flagged irregular early-stage funding practices. The audit was ongoing. It was no longer my problem, but it was, without question, Dylan's. What Naomi was left with was the settlement proceeds from the house sale, her own retirement accounts, and a part-time position at a smaller gallery on the west side of the city. She had not spoken to the press again. The lifestyle blog had never republished the removed piece. I heard from Dana Harmon that Naomi had started seeing a therapist. I hope she kept going, not out of warmth exactly, but because a person who had operated the way she had for 25 years needed someone to help them understand why. That wasn't my job anymore. Brad called me the morning the divorce was finalized. He didn't know the exact date. I hadn't told the kids when to expect it. He called about a construction contract he was bidding on and needed advice about the bonding requirements. We talked through the numbers for 20 minutes. Before he hung up, he said, "Hey Dad, are you good?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm good." "Okay." A pause. "I've got tickets to the Texans game next Sunday. You in?" "I'm in," I said. Kevin texted that same evening. A photo of Mason in his soccer uniform, mud on his knees, holding up 2 fingers for the 2 goals he'd scored that afternoon. No caption. None was needed. Lee called from Atlanta. "It's done?" she asked. "It's done," I said. "Good," she said simply. "Then, you coming to Atlanta for Thanksgiving?" "Wouldn't miss it," I said. Helen and I had dinner that Friday, a real dinner, at a restaurant she'd chosen, where we talked for 3 hours and closed the place down without noticing. She was easy to be around in a way that only certain people are, present, unhurried, comfortable with silence when it arrived. I drove her home and we sat in the car outside her house for another hour talking about nothing consequential. When I walked back to my car, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, something quieter and more durable than that. The sense of a man standing on ground that was genuinely his. The volunteer program offered me a board position in November. I accepted. The mentorship program I'd helped develop was being expanded to 2 additional community centers. I moved out of the high-rise apartment in December into a smaller house, a place I chose myself, 3 miles from Kevin and Brooke. A yard, a decent kitchen, a study with enough shelf space for the books I'd been collecting since September. No rose bushes yet. I'd plant those in the spring. On the first morning in the new house, I made coffee, took it out to the back porch, and sat in the quiet of an early December morning. The neighborhood was still. The sky was pale and clear. I thought about the man who had stood in a candlelit dining room 4 months ago, holding a note with another man's address, watching 25 years dissolve. That man had believed, somewhere underneath his steadiness, that his value lay in his usefulness to others. That his loyalty was a gift that would eventually be recognized and returned. That man had been wrong. And the correction, though it had cost everything it cost, had been necessary. I was 53 years old. I had 3 good children, 3 grandchildren, work that meant something, and a life I was building with both hands and clear eyes. That was not a consolation prize. That was everything worth having.